Okay, I just finished up listening to The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I think I'm saying that right. And oh my gosh, that book's ending was mind blowing. I'll get to it, but I'm kind of in shock about what I just listened to. Absolutely off the walls, crazy, did not see it coming. Wow, I can't believe the author went there. So, I'm just going to let you know my thoughts upon finishing the book, which was just now. And off the bat, I got to say, this book is absolutely not going to be for everybody. I liked it a lot. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And you need to understand what you're going into when you read this book. Because I don't read about books at all before I read them. I take the trust of people that I know, and I read books that they recommend to me, or I'll see high reviews and I'll rate those books. But I don't want to know anything about the book when I go in. I like to go in blind. And I have said repeatedly on this channel that I urge people to do the same thing, and you will get more out of your books going in blind. I don't know that I recommend that for this book. I think you need to learn a little bit about what this book is about, because you might not enjoy it, and you might have a really bad time, because you're going to start reading this book, and it's essentially split up into 3 different parts. In the first part, you have a kind of cookie cutter Mary Sue type of story of a girl who is not supposed to make this military academy, but does. And, we've all read some iteration of that story many, 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 many times. Somebody who is doesn't have as much money as everybody else. Society says they can't do X, but they go and achieve it and then some. And that's what the first part of the story is. It feels YA. And I thought it was okay. Not great. I've read a lot of stories that do this better. And I've certainly read some that do it worse. But it sets up this expectation for the reader that this is the story that you're going to get. Then part 2 comes around, and I'm not going to ruin anything of the story, but things start to ramp up, and it gets darker, and it becomes kind of miserable. Not in a horrible way, not for the reader, but for the characters that are going through the story. There is torture, there is rape, there is racism, and this is the part of the story where I felt kind of shocked at the tone shift, and I didn't love the story that was happening. All these things were happening, but it was happening in kind of these sound horrific, and they are, but it was kind of dull and just depressing. I like grimdark, but this felt grimdark without any greater purpose to it. And I didn't know where the story was going, and I started to become kind of soured on this book. And I told some people at this point I was probably going to give the book a 3 out of 5 stars. Part 3 comes around, and I won't tell you what happens, but it was a 5 out of 5 ending, and the author didn't really throw a twist at you. It was more of a, wow, I can't believe the author actually went there, in such a surprisingly over-the-top way that felt true to the story. It didn't feel gimmicky, but I like being shocked as a reader. I've read so many books, hundreds and hundreds of fantasy books, that I like to be surprised and shocked. And I certainly was that, and then some. I mean, you probably saw my look when I first started doing this review, is I had that look kind of permanently on my face for the last 10 minutes of reading this book. And I don't think I've ever read a book that really went into that vivid detail about such a horrific event. And, it starts making you think about historical examples of this happening and the impacts that would have on the people that have to do these major things. So, if you like a grimdark story, and you're okay with very dark elements, I think this book is a very good one to read. But you're going to have to get through the beginning portion of this book to get towards a more adult book. This book has a lot of, is clearly based in like Asian influences. The names have an Asian twist to them, and you kind of feel like you're going through China. It's not China, but it feels like a fantasy version of China. And I really like books that do a non-Western approach to them. Even though I like Western fantasy books, I've read so many of them. 95% of the fantasy books I read feel like they're just pulled straight out of England or the United States or somewhere Western Europe. So when a book is kind of set in a different area, either completely foreign that we wouldn't recognize on Earth, or kind of pulled from like Asian or African influences, it's a nice, refreshing take on things. And this book did a very good job at it. It is hard for me as a Western reader to hear a lot of these Asian influenced names because it takes me longer to differentiate them. It's just when you're not used to these names, and they feel so foreign to you as the reader, they kind of it's hard to differentiate them for me. But towards the second half of the book, it started kind of really piecing together, and I think that's also a problem with listening to audiobooks. But it'd probably be a little bit easier if I was writing down, and I'd probably take some notes if I was reading this in person and just make a little glossary if there's not one already, so I could easily figure those out. But listening to audio, I can't really do that because I'm listening while I'm driving and I can't refer to notes or anything. But yeah, this ending turned things up to 11. It turned things up to 12, and it left me with this impression that, man, I can't wait to go further in this series and find out where this story is going to go, because this could have been a one-off book. And, I'm certain that they clearly set up the next one, but such a major thing happens and wraps up such a major part of the story that it feels like the ending of a story. So to find out, okay, these characters are going to have to deal with the emotions of what just occurred, and I'm very compelled to continue on to find out where that story is going to take us. There's a really fun dynamic to this book. I say fun, I talked about everything that wasn't fun, but I really liked the take on the fantasy elements of this book. And the crux of it is that there's these shamans that can access the power of the gods. They're not like trying to bring the gods back down to earth. The gods are where they're at. But they want to harness their power to use. And the gods are angry. They're like vengeful gods. And they access the gods by using drugs and getting high. And it sounds kind of weird when I explain it, but it really works well for the story, and it's terribly unique. I like a unique spin on fantasy, and this certainly was that. So there's a lot that I liked about this book. I felt like it dragged in the middle a little bit too much, and I didn't love that. Also, this isn't the fault of the book, but I thought the audiobook narrator that I just listened to was not great. She did not do very well at doing male voices, and the main character in this book is a woman, or really a girl. And, she might be a woman towards the end of the book, but she certainly starts out as a girl. And so you kind of had to do a woman narrator because of the main character being a woman. It would have been kind of weird to do it any other way. But virtually all the other characters in the book are men. And she doesn't do a great job doing voices of men. They kind of all sound similar to each other, and they're not very believable. And it kind of pulls me out of the story a little bit when I heard her take on these. And they sounded way too similar to the point where you really couldn't tell who was talking. And it kind of just pulled me out. So I didn't love the audiobook narrator. Certainly didn't like, it wasn't so bad that I wouldn't continue on with the audiobooks. But yeah, certainly a knock against my enjoyment in this book. So, yeah, find out what you're getting into. If you're sensitive to very dark elements, don't read this book. You are going to have a really bad time. But if you're, like I mentioned, if you like a dark story, you like not just a military story, but the harsh, dark realities of war and the emotions that war brings to people that have to do atrocious things because they're in a military, then you're going to enjoy this book significantly. It's certainly one that's going to make you think. I'm going to be thinking all night about what I just read. I'm probably going to be thinking a lot tomorrow about what I just read. And that's the sign of a good book for me. So, certainly had its faults, had a lot good going for it, and I can't wait to continue reading. So, that's my review, and thanks so much for watching.